My name's David Davis and I've worked on silage and ruminants for the last 20 years in a research establishment. I now have my own business where I go out and consult and look at how we can improve silage for the dairy cow. Now, one of the key problems in silage making is that we need to produce lactic acid to carry out a good fermentation to get high quality silage. And there are some now in the industry that are claiming that we're producing silages with too high a level of lactic acid. The only way we can reduce lactic acid concentrations in silages is by increasing the dry matter. And lactic acid from silage does not actually cause a problem in terms of rumen cow health. So what we're going to do is show today that the difference between a high lactic acid silage and a low lactic acid silage when it's fed to the cow has very little effect on the rumen pH. So if we consider a dairy cow has a rumen with 100 litres of contents, and we look at how much a dairy cow on average will eat these days, say 15 kilograms of silage dry matter, and if we assume that the average silage is around 30% dry matter, a cow would therefore eat around 50 kilograms of fresh silage every day. And it would do this over meal patterns, typically somewhere between 10 and 15. So if we take the scenario of 10 feeding intervals and we feed this silage, we need to look at how the rumen pH drops when we have different silages with different lactic acid concentrations. So today we have a mock-up of this system. So we have freshly collected rumen liquor from a dairy cow. We have our pots here where we're going to put in 2 samples of 250 mils of rumen liquor. Now that 250 mils represents a very small proportion of our total rumen in the dairy cow. So we need to adjust the amount of silage we're going to put in there, and we're going to put in 14.5 grams, which is equivalent of 50 kilograms of fresh matter silage intake into a 100 litre rumen over 10 meal patterns. We have 2 different silages. The first is representative of very good fermentation where we've had high levels of lactic acid compared to the other acids, and that one has a lactic acid concentration of 130 grams. And then we have another one which has had a poor fermentation, low levels of lactic acid, but consequently higher levels of other VFAs, and that has 60 grams per kilogram lactic acid. So the 2 extremes that we would expect to see on dairy farms today. So I've got some freshly collected rumen fluid here. Give it a mix so that both samples are the same. And we're going to put 250 mils into these jars here. That's 1 lot for jar number 1. And then a second amount for the next jar. And then before we add our silage, we are going to just measure the pH in the jars, in the rumen fluid, to show that they're the same in both jars, and they're what we'd expect in the rumen of a cow. So we have there a reading of 6.8. And in this jar, come from the same collection, from the same animal, again we have 6.8. Now we're going to add what would be equivalent of a cow eating silage over a 10-hour period. So we've got 1 hour's worth of silage going in to our jar. This is sample 2. This is a silage that has low levels of lactic acid but high levels of other VFAs, and that is low levels of lactic acid being 60 grams per kilo. This is a well-preserved silage which has twice as much lactic acid at 130 grams per kilo. And we will see what difference that actually makes in terms of the pH of our rumen liquor once that has been well mixed in with the rumen fluid, as it would be in a cow. So both are being well mixed. And we have there 2 different silages with totally different lactic acid concentrations. And we can see what the pH now is. And we'll go into the rumen contents that had the high levels of lactic acid. and we can see that both those pHs were identical. So the level of lactic acid in our original silage has no effect on the rumen pH, contrary to what some people believe, that the level of lactic acid in our silage will reduce the level of the pH in the rumen. But the rumen is a well buffered system and can easily cope with these levels of lactic acid coming in with our silage.